Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching Al 24 News live from Algiers. Coming up next now, World News Program. Tens of thousands of Hindus took a holy dip into the frigid waters of the Ganges rivers in northern India on Friday, despite rising COVID-19 infections in the country. Plus, the U.S. Supreme Court has blocked President Joe Biden's rule requiring workers at large companies to be vaccinated or masked and tested weekly. Also coming up in our World News Program, Britain's royal family has stripped Prince Andrew of his military roles and royal patronages and said he will no longer be known as His Royal Highness as the second son of the Queen fights a lawsuit in the United States in which he is accused of sexual abuse. Thank you for joining us. First, in our top stories, tens of thousands of Hindus took a holy dip into the frigid waters of the Ganges rivers in northern India on Friday, despite rising COVID-19 infections in the country. Expressing concern it will become a super spreader event, doctors had earlier appealed to the state's High Court to reverse the decision to allow the festival this year, to no avail. Given the unknown dangers associated with the event, the state government has become under fiery criticism for giving the annual festival the go-ahead at all. Novak Djokovic faces deportation after the Australian government revoked his visa for a second time, 3 days away from the start of the 2022 Australian Open. World number one Novak Djokovic had been waiting since a judge overturned the original decision on Monday to find out whether Immigration Minister Alex Hawke would use his powers to reimpose the penalty. And for more news about COVID-19, let's follow this report by Ayadi Osama.
France smashed its daily record as the highly contagious Omicron variant races through the population. There were 368,149 infections reported within 24 hours. Swedish Social Democratic Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson has tested positive for COVID-19. Sweden has implemented new measures to fight the massive surge of COVID-19 cases due to Omicron variant this week. Lebanon is struggling to vaccinate its population even though it is not assured of supply. Many people are simply refusing to do so, explaining that the policy violates personal freedoms enshrined in the Lebanese constitution and international law. The Chinese city of Tianjin is under lockdown amid the serious coronavirus outbreak. Tianjin has reported 137 COVID-19 cases. The National Task Force Against COVID-19 of the Philippines will extend the duration of pandemic prevention and control restrictions imposed in Metro Manila and other provinces until the end of January. The World Health Organization has added 2 more drugs to its guidelines of recommended treatments for COVID-19, as the more infectious Omicron variant of the coronavirus triggers an unprecedented surge in cases around the world.
Still with COVID-19, the U.S. Supreme Court has blocked President Joe Biden's rule requiring workers at large companies to be vaccinated or masked and tested weekly. The justices at the nation's highest court said the mandate exceeded the Biden administration's authority. Separately, they ruled that a more limited vaccine mandate could stand for staff at government-funded healthcare facilities. The administration said the mandates would help fight the pandemic. And regarding the new measures taken by U.S. President to combat COVID-19, let's follow this report by Nabil Khazini.
Please wear the mask.
Amid the surge of the coronavirus infections in the United States and the mounting pressure on hospitals, U.S. President Joe Biden announced Thursday his new administration's plan to curb the spread of the virus. At the top of his plan is a push to get people who are not vaccinated to be vaccinated. Biden blamed them for the high hospitalization cases.
But as long as we have tens of millions of people who will not get vaccinated, we're going to have full hospitals and needless deaths. So the single most important thing to determine your outcome in this pandemic is getting vaccinated.
In addition to his plans detailed last month to order 500 million tests, Joe Biden said the administration will buy another extra 500 million at-home COVID-19 tests. A website will launch next week so Americans can order them for free.
We're on track to roll out a website next week where you can order free tests shipped to your home. And in addition to the 500 million, 500 million tests that are in the process of being acquired to ship to you homes for free, today I'm directing my team to procure an additional 500 million, additional 500 million more tests to distribute for free.
President Joe Biden has again turned to the military to fill staffing shortages and to help hospitals surge medical staffs as the Omicron variant of COVID-19 continues to strain hospitals nationwide.
Today, I'm announcing our next deployment of 6 additional federal medical teams, a total of more than 120 military medical personnel, to 6 hard-hit states.
Joe Biden has come under criticism from public health officials, Republicans, and some members of his own party for not doing more to distribute tests to the public amid a record number of COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations. Criticism from Biden's way to tackle the pandemic also came from his predecessor Donald Trump, who described it saying that Biden promised to shut down the virus, not the economy, but he has failed miserably on both.
Amid growing criticism and public outrage, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson had apologised for attending a party held in the Downing Street office during coronavirus lockdown in May 2020 on the eve of the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral.
Johnson, who won a landslide election victory in 2019, is in the middle of the most serious crisis of his presidency following a series of scandals and accusations of lockdown-breaking rules. Allegations of additional lockdown-breaking parties at Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Downing Street office are inflaming public outrage in the United Kingdom. Government employees allegedly held social events last year while Queen Elizabeth II grieved her husband.
I want to apologise. I know the rage they feel with me and with the government I lead when they think that in Downing Street itself the rules are not being properly followed by the people who make the rules.
After months of deceit and deception, the pathetic spectacle of a man who's run out of road. His defence that he didn't realise he was at a party.
A Daily Telegraph revealed on Thursday that on April 16, 2021, 2 drinks parties were conducted in Johnson's official residence. In violation of coronavirus regulations in effect at the time, Johnson was at the Chequers country estate on that day. The parties apparently drove around 30 people who enjoyed drinking and dancing. The events are reported to have started in the Downing Street garden and ended in the early hours of the morning. The next day, Elizabeth said her goodbyes to Prince Philip, who was 99 years old at the time. One of the most striking pictures of the UK under viral restrictions was the monarch sitting alone in the chapel during her late husband's memorial service. According to the Telegraph, which cited unnamed witnesses, staff at the party went to a neighbouring store to fill a suitcase with beer, used a laptop to play music in Downing Street basement, and smashed a swing used by the Prime Minister's young son during their loud party. Britons were allowed to socialise indoors at the time, with the exception of individuals in their household or so-called support bubble. Outdoors, people could socialise in groups of up to 6 people or 2 houses of any size.
Russia said on Thursday it was hitting a dead end in its efforts to persuade the West to bar Ukraine from joining NATO and roll back decades of alliance expansion in Europe, and threatened unspecified consequences in response. Usama Ayadi reports.
Deadlock. That seems a fair word to sum up where things stand after days of diplomacy on the crisis at the Ukraine border. Some 100,000 Russian troops are lined up there. An army of diplomats has been frantically trying to find an off-ramp, some way to de-escalate and avert war.
We stuck to our core premise of reciprocity. We were firm in our principles and clear about those areas where we can make progress and those areas that are non-starters. Allied unity and transatlantic solidarity were on full display, and they remain on full display. The discussions were frank and direct. They were useful. They gave us and our allies things to consider. They gave Russia things to consider. We will now reflect and consult with allies and partners on how to proceed.
Talks have been played out this week in Geneva, then Brussels, and then in Vienna. But today, the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, explained the situation to be a real danger for renewed armed conflict in Europe. A senior U.S. official warned Thursday that the drumbeat of war is sounding loud, following a week's worth of diplomacy between the West and Russia that wrapped up Thursday. Both U.S. and Russian officials sounded a pessimistic note over the talks following Thursday's meeting in Vienna at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It was the third session that capped a week of intensive meetings that the United States and its NATO allies hoped could spur Russia to pursue a path of de-escalation and diplomacy rather than mobilizing the tens of thousands of Russian troops whose presence has swelled along Ukraine's borders. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov suggested the talks had reached a dead end, or a difference in approaches because the US and NATO would not address Moscow's demands about Ukraine never joining NATO.
Russia has strongly repeated that NATO will not expand eastwards despite the rejection of by the military alliance amid a Russian troop build-up near Ukraine. It added on Friday that it would not wait indefinitely for the Western response. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said in a statement during a press conference, quote, "We have run out of patience. The West has been driven by hubris and has worsened tensions in violations of its obligations and common sense. They must understand that the key to everything is the guarantee that NATO will not expand eastwards," end quote. Ukraine has been hit by a massive cyber attack, knocking a number of key government websites offline and issuing a warning to the public to expect the worst. The disruption comes at a time of extreme tensions with Russia, which has massed around 100,000 troops of Ukraine's border. Ukrainian cyber police launched an investigation into the attack and have yet to attribute blame. Britain's royal family has stripped Prince Andrew of his military roles and royal patronages and said he will no longer be known as His Royal Highness, as the second son of the Queen fights a lawsuit in the United States in which he is accused of sexual abuse. The 61-year-old Duke of York was forced to step down from public duties in 2019 because of his connection to the convicted U.S. sex offender. The Biden administration imposed on Wednesday its first sanctions over North Korea's weapons programs following a series of North Korean missile launches, including 2 since last week. The U.S. Treasury said that the steps aimed to prevent the advancement of North Korea's programs and to impede its attempts to increase weapons technologies. To India now, where a railroad official said that rescuers discovered 4 dead overnight while clearing the 12 damaged coaches of a train that derailed in India's West Bengal state, bringing the death toll to 9. At least 45 persons were hurt in the disaster on Thursday when the coaches slid off the rails and 3 capsized. And now a former Syrian secret police commander was found guilty of crimes against humanity by a German court on Thursday for overseeing the mistreatment of inmates at a jail near Damascus a decade ago, a decision characterized as historic by the UN's top human rights official.
Anwar Aslan has been convicted of the crime as the highest-ranking Syrian official to date. Those who have endured torture or lost relatives at the hands of President Bashar Assad's administration in Syria's long-running conflict were eagerly waiting for ruling.
This trial cast a much-needed, renewed spotlight on the kinds of sickening torture, cruel and truly inhuman treatment, including abject sexual violence that countless Syrians were subjected to in detention facilities.
The Koblenz State Court concluded that the defendant was in charge of interrogations and facility in the Syrian city of Douma known as Al-Khatib, or Branch 251, where suspected opposition protesters were detained. The court sentenced the 58-year-old to life in prison, with possibility of parole after 15 years. Ruslan is accused of supervising the systemic and violent torture of almost 4,000 captives between April 2011 and September 2012, resulting in the deaths of at least 58 persons, according to German prosecutors. Judge determined that there was enough evidence to find him guilty for the deaths of 27 people.
Authorities accused Stuart Rhodes, the founder and commander of the far-right Oath Keepers militia organization, and 10 other members of affiliates with seditious conspiracy in the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol, despite the fact that hundreds of charges had been filed in the year since pro-Trump rioters stormed the Capitol in an attempt to prevent President Joe Biden's 2020 election victory from being certified. California's Governor Gavin Newsom has denied parole for Sirhan, the 77-year-old who has spent more than 50 years in prison for the assassination of Robert Kennedy. Newsom has previously cited Kennedy as his political hero. Sirhan was by the parole board last year after two of Kennedy's sons argued in favor of his release and prosecutors did not object. The board ruled that he was not a danger to public safety. In the wake of that, required the panel to consider he committed the offense at a young age. The Human Rights Watch has highlighted top 3 places in their long list of concern for the coming year: Ethiopia's Tigray region, Myanmar, and Sudan. Executive director of the organization criticized Western government, accusing them of promoting investment deals with and conduct arms sales to countries seen to violate human rights. And for more world news, let's follow this report by Ayadi Osama.
The United States announced that it will propose to its 14 partners in the UN Security Council to expand the scope of sanctions imposed on North Korea after Pyongyang recently launched ballistic missiles in tests that violate UN resolutions issued against it. A top Sri Lankan prison officer has been sentenced to death for the execution-style massacre of 27 inmates, which drew international criticism. The Colombo High Court on Wednesday found Prisons Commissioner Emil Lamaiwej guilty of the November 2012 killings, but released his co-accused police commando, Moses Rangajiwa. The Pakistani government has welcomed a joint statement by the P5 on preventing nuclear war as a positive development, a week after regional rival India issued a similar statement. China's activities on the South China Sea, including its historic claims on almost all parts of the vital trade route, gravely undermine the rule of law in the oceans and universally recognized provisions in the international law. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration on Thursday issued fresh warnings that new 5G wireless services could still disrupt flights, saying there were big differences between U.S. aviation protections and those used in France.
Oil prices have hit high levels, and according to officials, this would be short-lived. The surge of Omicron variant had already an economic impact on the sector. Sid Islam reports.
As coronavirus infections rise around the world, oil jumped approximately to 4% on Tuesday, supported by tight stock, and it is expected that the spread of the Omicron variant will not disrupt the global demand recovery. Brent crude rose from $285 to $83.72 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate rose from $2.99 to $81.22 a barrel as well, which is seen as the highest since early November. According to market sources citing American Petroleum Institute, U.S. crude records dropped by about 1.1 million barrels last week. Demands have been increased since 2021, reaching pre-pandemic levels, at a time when OPEC Plus slowly eased record output cuts made in 2020. However, absence of capacity in some OPEC countries in which supply additions cut below 400,000 barrels per day. According to U.S. Federal Reserve Chairperson Jerome Powell expectations, the economic impact of Omicron is short-lived.
Omicron has yet to wreak the havoc of the Delta variant and may never do so, keeping the global recovery on track.
A recent suspension in Libya has also held prices down. A national oil corp said it will suspend exports from the Isara terminal.
Combination of facts that demand is going to be stronger than anticipated and that OPEC's supply may not grow as fast as the demand is why prices are climbing.
Euro-oil stock data show that crude oil and petroleum products stocks in European refineries have fallen to 11% earlier this year. Meanwhile, European margins in kerosene refining are once again reaching pre-pandemic levels due to the increasing global aviation activity in spite of the widespread of the Omicron. The US government has raised up its forecast for oil demand while lowering its forecast for oil production growth. Production was expected to rise by 640,000 barrels per day in 2022, lower than yesteryear's estimate of 670,000 barrels per day increase. Total oil demand now seen growing to 840,000 barrels per day, higher than the 700,000 barrels per day increase expected last month. It is estimated to rise by another 330,000 barrels per day in 2023.
And now it's time to have some economic news in this report by Nabil Khazini.
As more travel restrictions and few lockdowns to contain the Omicron COVID variant are being set in China, analysts are turning cautious on the country's economy. Experts believe that the China's zero-COVID strategy to control the pandemic affects consumers more than factories. The greatest impact of the zero-COVID policy has been on hotels and restaurants, while manufacturing and agriculture were the least affected and have contributed the most to growth. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is calling for doubling the number of legal immigrants into America as a way to ease inflation and the worker shortage. U.S. Chamber of Commerce CEO Susan Clark announced that the United States needs more workers and therefore should welcome people who want to come to the country. The Bank of Korea hinted at another key interest rate hike in the coming months, even after it returned to pre-pandemic level, a step from the bank in order to mitigate inflationary pressures and controlling household debt. The Bank of Korea's widely expected decision to raise the rate to 1.25% was its third hike in 6 months. In England, OVO Energy is set to announce it will cut about 1,700 jobs. The restructuring would be aimed at saving costs in the face of the current energy crisis. The last year has been particularly challenging for energy suppliers, with 27 collapsing in 2021. Of these, 25 went under after gas prices began to spike last August.
To some light news now, the Peaky Blinders or the Gangster series of Birmingham, which was among the top series of the OTT platform since 2014, the fans were desperately waiting for its last season for a long time. And now, after 2 years, here is the trailer of the season 6 with Abdelrahim Kashur.
After a long break of 2 years, one of the most beloved series in the whole world, Peaky Blinders, is returning with its last season. BBC has released its trailer, and after the release, the fans seem happy because the series has all the big names returning for the season 6.
There for you.
What about security?
Yeah, well, about that. By order of the City of Birmingham Police Department, you and your ugly workforce.
The English TV series was delayed because of the pandemic, but now the season is ready to stream in 2022. As per the trailer Class, the gang is coming back together, and Cillian Murphy is shown leading his team. The trailer has given some tidbits about the Alfie Solomons, the character played by Tom Hardy, and his return is season 6. One of the show's most loved characters, Tommy's auntie Polly Gray, played by Helen McCrory, died in April 2021. She was 52 years old, and she was an essential character of the show. Helen McCrory played the role of Tommy's aunt, and in many scenes she has acted as the matriarch of the family. Cillian's outstanding performance had left the fans speechless, which was the primary reason for the show's popularity. But the series has some hidden facts, which are still a question for the viewers. Several scenes have made the viewers curious, so there is a list of the hidden truths that we never has an answer.
Take a good look, Tom. Because one of us isn't going to be here for long.
The series director Knight had admitted that he wanted to give the show an ending with a sound of war, and the plot was lies between the two world wars. The First World War had seriously affected the people, so World War II will be an exciting way to end the show.
This particular incarnation of the family story, I know that it's going to end at the beginning of the Second World War. But after that, I think that the momentum is such that maybe we will continue with other bits of the story.
At the end, there are many myths regarding the show Peaky Blinders. Some believe that the gang exists and extraordinarily ruthless and violent, whereas on the other hand, some believes it is just a fictional story.
That's all from me, Nadia Kasmi, and the rest of the team. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.